Welcome. We are glad that you are here tonight to come and to learn more about what is happening from our friend from the Holy Land, Uri Goldflam. Our relationship goes back to about 2014, and it's just good seeing a number of you who have actually been to the Holy Land. So raise your hand if you've been to Israel. Raise your hand, yeah. So take a look real quick. These are the ones that, we've been on tour together. So obviously a big part. And how many of you, just show of hands, I promise I'm not going to necessarily hold you to this, but I may remind you of it. How many of you plan to go again sometime in the next X number of years, not knowing exactly when that might be? Okay, yeah, so that's great too. Really excited about the opportunity to do it. I don't think, Scott, you'll mind if I share this, will you, sir? Marva really wanted to go, and Scott was a little reluctant, and I just said to him, I really want to encourage you to go. And one of the things that I was told, and it was true when I experienced for the first time, it really does turn your biblical understanding from more of a black and white, trying to guess what the Sea of Galilee is like or what Jerusalem might be like. It really kind of brings like color or 3D, or there's a number of different expressions, and so that's one of the great blessings that we've actually had. But I do consider actually not just going to Israel to be a great blessing, but I do consider like our friendship to be a great blessing. And I know that a lot of in this room, a lot of people in this room, Uri, really do appreciate you and pray for you and for your family and for a number of things. So we're just grateful for you as well, and definitely want you to know that. But I just want us to remind us of a couple of things, and then I'm going to really turn this over. I've got some questions I'm going to ask Uri, but probably for a bunch of it I might even just go and sit down. When the war broke out, and I'll start with the previous war. When the war broke out in Ukraine, I remember thinking to myself in February of that year, it'll be good for us to somewhat capitalize on this, meaning to get some attention to it, because after a while people will forget about it. They just won't care about it as much. And it's not because we don't care about atrocities or those people who are being hurt, and you may still occasionally pray for those, but when the war breaks out, we pay real close attention, and then after a while, right, we don't even go. Andrea and I, Sunnybrook doesn't go as regularly as we did after the war broke out. And I remember thinking the same thing after October 7th. After October 7th, all of us, our ears perked up, our prayer lives changed. We prayed regularly for all that was going on. And then what happens to us is that over time, we forget. 9/11 was how long ago? Lest we forget. And what happens to us? We don't try to forget. I hope we don't intend to forget, but we just can forget. And so I was just grateful for the opportunity. But let's be honest, remember when Uri was here last November, how many people were here? And I wasn't surprised. Few were going to be here, and Uri's even kind of seeing that on a lot of his dates, which I hope it's not a lack or well, maybe it is less interest. So I'm glad we're doing this. I really am, so that we do not forget a number of different things. And so we're glad that you are here. We're glad that you are back here. This is going to be a little bit of a Q&A, but a Q&A where I'm going to ask a brief question, and then Uri is going to give a longer response. So I'm not here to just talk to him or to you. I'm here to just try to lead our conversation tonight. But the last time you were here was just briefly after October 7th, and so I think it was in November of that year.
November.
Yeah, November of that year you came. So would you mind just giving us an update in terms of, not a breakdown of all that has happened since last November to date, but if you were to try to kind of catch us up to speed, what are some of the major events, things, and situations that you think we need to be aware of?
So first of all, once again, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming to this evening to hear and to listen and to learn, and also thank you for your support, for your prayers, for your thoughts. It's extremely meaningful. I think that Jim, what you mentioned about the length of time that passes after event, there's a natural cycle. People get back to their lives. People get back to their lives, and I also feel it now on this trip. It's harder to get more people into a room to talk about this. And it's not because I think there's a lack of interest. I think that's because you have your own things to deal with. There's the domestic issues going on over here. There's a lot of troubles happening around us, and sometimes the attention span naturally wanes. But that's also the reason that I feel motivated to continue coming out here and deliver this message. So this slide is the same slide I had here 10 months ago. And the date is October 7th, 2023. We're now in September 2024. For most Israelis, it's still October 2023. It's the 340th day of October. The trauma that Israelis went through in October last year is still very, very much alive. It's not, Israelis are not in PTSD. There's no post-trauma because they're still in the trauma. And they're still responding to the trauma, so it's still taking shape. Those of you who are in treatment know that trauma is not just the event that took place, it's how the body responds to that trauma, and Israelis are still responding. And there's also internal conflict. We experienced, and I think the last time I was here I was a bit naive. I stood here and told you what was is not what shall be. And I meant the internal discord within Israel, the division between Israelis on the right and the left, and the yes Bibi and no Bibi, and the different parties and the different issues that are segmenting and polarizing Israeli society. I naively thought that this event will bring everybody together and will put those divisive issues on the back burner. Sadly, I was wrong. Israeli society is as divisive as ever. Our internal domestic politics are playing a role in the war, from different directions. Like everybody's pulling the blanket from their direction, and that is having a very dramatic effect. And our enemies are exploiting this. You see that both Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran are monitoring very, very closely the Israeli news. And when they see that there's an uptick in discord, that's when they push further. And they release also information and many thousands of bots and social media and fake accounts to try to ferment more discord within Israeli society. It's part of their war strategy. And so unfortunately, we haven't found the magic bullet for this. So one thing that has changed since last time I was here is now I'm a little bit less naive. I'm a little bit less optimistic. I'm not the bearer of good news today. The Israeli society is as divided as ever. It's fighting an internal conflict as well as facing off with the outer world. What we have found, though, and this might be a little bit of a ray of hope, is that generation that we all thought was the TikTok generation, millennials who are worried about making short videos, go to the beach and getting a degree in whatever, they want to become an art designer, a CEO of a high-tech company in 2.5 years of work. They're the ones that stepped up. It's those young millennials, men and women, who are now fighting and saving our country, and with sacrifice and selflessness, and with the understanding that we have no other land, there's no other home, and this is where you have to make the stand, and they are determined to do so. And I would dare say that they are as dedicated and ideological and of high nature, high values as our founding generation. And that's something that might be optimistic, because sometimes we look at the millennials and we're worrying about the future. There's a lot to worry about, but they also can step up. So that's something that is very important to remember, and they have, at least back in Israel. The war effort in Gaza has almost, I say this very carefully because either my sources inside the military, people who are in reserves or have come home, and also from open sources from the media, Israel has succeeded in dismantling the majority of the offensive Hamas capabilities. And when I mean that, I mean that we have taken away Hamas's ability to fire rockets, for example, onto Israel. So there are hardly any more rockets being fired from Gaza into Israel. However, they're still able to control their many, many thousands of Hamas combatants who are holding guns and can terrorize people in Gaza. So when we talk about the day after, everybody's talking about the day after, there won't be anybody who will step up. There will not be anybody from the local Palestinian population that will step up to manage, to rule, to organize the population in any kind of a rehabilitation effort, as long as there is even a small band of Hamas terrorists with guns who can shoot them down. And that's the long-term situation. So there's no easy fix. I often hear in the media people saying, well, we need to get a ceasefire, bring back the hostages, ceasefire that will be extended to permanent ceasefire, and then we can start rebuilding Gaza. There's no rebuilding Gaza as long as Hamas is there, because Israel won't allow it. And so here we are kind of locked into this impossible situation. On the one hand, a war which is prolonged. Israeli society is not built for long wars. The people who are fighting the war are mostly reservists. They're people in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, people who have jobs and run businesses and are CEOs and are teachers and are drivers and are bankers and are clerks and are mothers and fathers. Israel can't sustain a long war, but we are. But that longevity, that length of breath is starting to run out. We don't have a choice. We have to continue doing this. At the same time, it's the same people who are fighting the war who are also managing the economy. Right? They say in Israel, it's kind of like a sad joke. 1/3 of the country serve in the military, 1/3 of the country pay taxes, 1/3 of the country work. It's the same third. But the situation is that this army has been able to dismantle Hamas infrastructure. And by now you all know that Hamas infrastructure is not just what we find overground, but also what we find underground. Tremendous. I'm talking about like 500 miles of tunnels. It's bigger than the New York or the London underground. I mean, it's unthinkable what they've done with aid money that they've stolen to build this underground city in and throughout and within civilian population. Israel has been able to reduce the civilian population casualties to a very small number. Maybe we'll talk about that, a little bit about that later. And enter Rafah, where many people have told Israel it would be impossible, and held back the entry to Rafah. Today, Rafah is completely taken over by Israel. In fact, these hostages that were executed 2 weeks ago were found right there in Rafah. So the war in Gaza is starting to decrease in intensity, because we have there's one Hamas battalion left deeply embedded into the civilian population, so they can't be touched right now. But the war in the south is starting to decrease in intensity, and the war in the north is starting to increase in intensity. And this is something you may not be hearing too much on the media, but for 11 months, Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, has been firing on a daily basis into Israel. Entire swath of land in the north of Israel, which is inaccessible. 60,000 people that were evacuated from their homes have not been able to return for 11 months, living in hotels all over the country, and an additional 60,000 who are living under daily barrage of rockets.
Let me step in here. For those of you that have been, one of the things he said to me, and we'll talk about this at the end, about a future possible trip, but to give you a bit of a location, we would not be able to go if we went now. We literally could go now. It would be complicated to get there. We'd have to fly in El Al, all that. But we wouldn't be able to visit Dan. So think of that area. We would not be able to go to Golan Heights, remember, and see that area. And we would not be able to go to Caesarea Philippi. So the military has completely blocked off all of that area because, as Uri says, they say in the north that if
you can see Lebanon, Lebanon can see you.
So they've literally evacuated those areas. So to kind of put it in our minds, places that we could not see, Caesarea Philippi, Dan, and the Golan Heights. And then so all of the villages. The Druze village that we ate at, I think every tour that I've been on, we've eaten at that Druze village. Is that still occupied, or has that actually been evacuated?
No, the village, the Golan has not been evacuated.
Okay, it's not been evacuated. Okay,
But it's the next village over from where, if you remember a few weeks ago, a rocket landed and killed 12 children in a soccer field.
yeah, so that was right where we ate that lunch every time we've gone. So 60,000 have been evacuated from the north. Continue.
So to come to the conclusion of your question,
Yeah.
kind of like an update, the war in the south is starting to decrease, not over by any long stretch of the imagination. They'll continue for years, but decrease in intensity. The war in the north starting to increase, which will make the war in the south look like child's play. Because Hezbollah has an army which is at least 20 times in orders of magnitude larger than Hamas. It's the 8th largest rocket arsenal in the world. 150,000 rockets that are aimed at Israel. Thousands of troops, many of whom were taken out of the equation this morning. By the way, I hope you turned off your pagers before coming in.
Yeah, I knew it. Yeah, I knew he was going to use that one.
But
Let me step in here too. This is interesting because Uri has on his phone a notification. There's been a notification of a rocket launch, 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 and it's just like constant. And if you look at a map of Israel where all of the sirens are going off, the entire northern half of the country is just lit red all the time. And yet at 3:30 this afternoon, Beirut time,
7:30 a.m. our time.
they stopped after 4,000 pagers exploded. How many of you guys have not heard about this? Okay, so you need to go back and check on the news, but the Israeli military is not claiming.
Allegedly.
They're not claiming anything yet, but 4,000 pagers that were in the hands of Hezbollah agents, terrorists, exploded at the same time. And about 2,700 people were injured, and a lot of things happened. And then at that same moment, all the rockets stopped in the north. So kind of interesting.
There may or may not be a connection. But that's where we are. The last thing I want to say before we move on to the next issue, that there's a lot of talk about a ceasefire. Right? And you hear this also on your presidential debate. People talk about a ceasefire. It's in the streets. People talk about a ceasefire. In the op-ed articles everywhere, ceasefire has to happen, it has to happen now, as though a ceasefire in Gaza is kind of like a magic, a silver bullet, like a magic pill, that if only we can reach that, everything else will suddenly go back to normal. And Hezbollah will stop firing, and people will go back home, and Iran will suddenly become all, puppies and lambs. That's not going to happen. Israelis are not going to go back home in the north simply because Hezbollah promised not to fire rockets anymore. Right? If Hezbollah still has the capability to launch a barrage of rockets and attack Israel through the border, just like they did on October 7th in the south, Hezbollah is planning to do that in the north. If they're not removed from the border, Israelis won't go home. And the only way right now, it seems, for them to be removed from the border is if Israel removes them by force. By the way, there is a UN resolution, 1701, UN resolution, Security Council resolution, a binding resolution that requires Hezbollah to dismantle and remove itself from the northern border. And the Lebanese army, which is separate from Hezbollah, is supposed to redeploy. But that resolution has never been implemented. The only part of it which has been implemented is that the UN is paying the salaries of 15,000 UN troops who are now in Lebanon and are doing nothing. So we're seeing a situation that even though the war in the south seems to be declining in intensity, not over, but declining in intensity, the war in the north is increasing in intensity, and throughout all of this, there are 101 hostages. 66 of them are still presumed to be alive, who are being held by Hamas terrorists. in the dungeons of Gaza.
How many were taken?
250.
250. 101 remain, and they believe about 66 are still alive.
There's no evidence to the contrary, right?
Okay.
The 45 that are considered deceased are people that they have found evidence, whether it's body parts, remains, or visual evidence of their death, that they've been declared dead. But the others have not, so they're assumed to be alive.
Okay. So 66, we should continue to pray for them and for their families and not forget. So tell us a little bit of what life is like right now in Israel.
So throughout the last 11 months, there's been a constant growing of pressure. Right? Israelis, from the very, very beginning, at first, like I said, a sense of unity, a sense of amazing selflessness and sacrifice, and entering almost every level where the government failed, whether it's security, whether it's social services, whether it's helping the displaced people. The civil society has stepped up, and there's a tremendous sense of unity and mutual responsibility, and that's wonderful. It took about 3 or 4 months, and there started cracks in this sense of unity, and our old politics began to play a role again. Unity government, not unity government, with Netanyahu, without Netanyahu, and so on and so forth. And so that pressure has been growing, and with every day that passes and the hostages are not returned, and it's not clear whether they even will be returned. And it's not clear also what more can be done about it. But because Israel is a democracy, and because Israelis can only complain to their own government, we can't go and demonstrate in front of Sinwar's office, then the pressure mounts against the government. And so this is a growing pressure that's been going on incrementally for the last 11 months. And 2 weeks ago, something happened that made it all jump up dramatically. And that's the execution of 6 hostages that were in Gaza just 24 hours before the military found them. Actually, I want to show you a video. Ryan, can we cue up the video?
In the next couple of minutes, we're going to go down into the tunnel shaft 20 meters below where the hostages were murdered. The tunnel shaft was in a children's room, in a house. Those are the walls of this children's room with Snow White and Mickey Mouse on the wall, and a tunnel shaft where hostages were murdered downstairs, 20 meters below the ground. Hamas used those letters in the tunnel, and there was a hiding floor. All he needed to do is to break the floor and then go out through the children's room, inside to the street, and go back into the tunnel. This is how Hamas built this tunnel. The shaft goes down about 20 meters into the ground, using 4 separate letters. There, it connects to a narrow tunnel with no rooms that is so low you can't stand up straight in it. The tunnel is about 120 meters long and ends in a blocked iron door. This short blocked part of the tunnel is where the hostages were held and murdered. We know that between 2 to 6 terrorists were here with the hostages. We are gathering all the stuff here for forensics, for intelligence. We can see magazines, an AK-47 magazine, chargers, all used by the terrorists, Quran books, a hairbrush. We need to check who used it. But there were women here in the tunnel. This is their blood. This is the blood of Hirsch, Eden, Carmel, Uri, Almog, and Alex. They were heroes, and they were here in this tunnel for weeks or days, we will find out. But they were here in this tunnel in horrific conditions, where there is no air to breathe, where you cannot stand. and they survived. But they were murdered by terrorists, and they're still hostages. 101. Some of them are alive in the same conditions, in tunnels like this, in Gaza. And we need to do everything we can, in all the means we can, to bring them back home alive. Why murder innocent people, women, young men? They were all in the music festival, and Carmel was at their home in the kibbutz. Why murder them in a tunnel after they survived 11 months in horrific condition? We pray and think in our hearts and minds, and we will keep on doing everything we can, everything to bring back home all the hostages.
So the 6 hostages, if you put up the photo, young people, the 5 were in the Nova Music Festival. These are all what we call peaceniks. Right? Music is their language and peace is their dream. And they were dancing there because they wanted to create an energy of peace that would overflow and also extend over Gaza. And Carmel was kidnapped from her home, from her bed. They were held there and they were executed because the IDF came to about 750 meters away, about half a mile from where they were. They did not know they were there. There's no intelligence information that the hostages were there. They just happened to be about half a mile away. A few days earlier, they did rescue another hostage, an Israeli Bedouin, a Muslim, Israeli Muslim, who was also kidnapped, and they rescued him. The Israeli army rescued him, and the captors, fearing that the Israeli army are coming close, simply executed the hostages and then ran away, probably were killed later on in an altercation. But this specific event gave a very big boost to the protesting in Israel, and the public feeling of frustration and anger and sadness just went off the charts. And you can see that still now playing out. The problem with this is that the world, looking at what happened, and again, Israelis can't go and protest in front of the Al Jazeera office in Tel Aviv. They go to protest to their government. And the world, rather than apply pressure on Hamas, its allies, its supporters, the people who give sanctuary to its leaders, and the media, rather than be outraged that 6 hostages, including one American, Hirsch is an American citizen, were brutally executed in the middle of negotiation for their release, pointed fingers at Israel. It's Israel that needs to do more and make more effort to do this, and of course they blamed Netanyahu. Now, whether you like Netanyahu or not is irrelevant. The executioners were Hamas. Hamas has leverages that can be applied, and they're not being applied. It's as though they got a pass for executing these hostages. And that is what gives Israelis, or puts Israelis in a place of a deep sense of frustration. It seems that nothing can be done to Jews, to Israelis, to gain the world's sympathy. They will always be pointed at as the perpetrators. Hamas will always be the side that lacks agency, as though it's in their nature, they can't help it, and the Palestinians will always be the victims. And so this is something that stands up in stark contrast for the last 2 weeks, and that causes a very large increase in the pressure within Israel.
So your kids still go to school? Generally speaking, so that the question that we're kind of still dealing with here is, what is it like? The streets are empty, the streets are full, the shops, the businesses. What is it like right now in Israel with 60,000 displaced in the north? You live in the southern part of Jerusalem.
I live south of Jerusalem.
South of Jerusalem. Yeah. So tell us a little bit of what it's like with your 3 children, and what is life like for the average Israeli right now in Israel?
So in general terms, life goes on. Like that there are about 1 million people that are directly affected in the north and in the south. Many lost their lives, many lost loved ones, many lost their livelihood, their homes, and are tragically impacted. There's another 8.5 million that live in the middle that are not. They are affected to the extent that they have circles of friends who have been hurt, or they themselves serve in the military. Some of their businesses have been hurt, but pretty much everybody else goes on about their business and goes on about their lives. Kids go to school. Well, there was a strike at the high schools at the beginning of the school year, and because teachers' unions, etc. I don't have to get into it right now, but that's normal, right? That's kind of like a normal thing. You think that, oh, there's a war going on, existential threat. Maybe they will put off the strike, but no, they didn't, because life goes on. To answer specifically your question, my kids, they go to school, they go to their dance, their scouts, they go to the gym, they get on the bus and go to the mall, and they go to movies, and they hang out with friends. And there's no direct impact on their lives other than the awareness that they're living through a war. One of my closest childhood friends' son was killed in the first day of the Israeli counteroffensive already in October. I think I spoke about him when I was here last. A neighbor of ours, the man that prays with me on Yom Kippur, high holidays, that we share the pulpit when we lead prayers in our synagogue, lost his son. Down the block, just a few blocks away from where we live, on a large roundabout in our town, is the home of Elia Cohen. Elia Cohen has been kidnapped from the Nova Festival and is still missing in Gaza. And every week there's a vigil and candle lighting near his home. My kids drive by that house every day. So there's definitely the awareness. There is a sense, the country is in a sense of war. At the same time, life is continuing to be maintained. From the industry perspective, as somebody who works in tourism, nothing's normal, right? So as far as tourism is concerned, that industry has been completely devastated. In the places, in the old city of Jerusalem, the alleys are empty, the shops are closed, there's no line anywhere. There are a few shops here and there. You can always coordinate a shop to be opened. But in general, it's a feeling of sad emptiness. That the streets are relatively empty. The hotels, many of the hotels house refugees, internally displaced Israelis, but very few tourists. Some people come on solidarity missions, family visits, and things like that. But the tourism industry is completely devastated.
So can you travel to Israel? The answer is yes. American, Delta, and United currently are not flying. Uri and I were looking at them today. United says they'll start in October, so next month. Delta is suggesting that they might actually start sometime later this year, and American won't think about going until at least the beginning of 2025. So that makes just travel a little bit complicated, but it's not that there's a necessary restriction. So the very first tour we took over, we went on El Al out of Newark. And so there's definitely El Al flights, which is the airline out of Israel. They fly all the time. And so that's kind of one of those things that's actually happening. So 1,200 killed on October 7th. I think you said roughly 700 military personnel have died in the war since it began.
That includes roughly 400 soldiers that died on October 7th.
Okay.
We're within that 1,200.
Okay. And then I want to talk a little bit about, because, over here, definitely we have seen on college campuses, very small one here at Oklahoma State, I think last May, but there's been a lot of conversations and discussions about the massive numbers, debatable numbers, about what's happening in Palestine. And I think as followers of Jesus Christ, it becomes one of those complicated things. It's like, yeah, we don't believe that terrorists should just, on October 7th, do what they do. And they should be brought to justice. But then all of a sudden, we are dealing with reports, and we don't know even what to believe, and I don't think we can answer that question here tonight, but man, there's just a lot of collateral damage that's being done. And as followers of Jesus, man, we just can't pretend that they don't matter. And I don't think you think they don't matter. So I would love for you to just help us think, how do you, and I think you're somewhat of a typical Israeli person, how do you look at the quote-unquote atrocities that are also happening to the Palestinian people? Give us an Israeli perspective of that. It seems like a lot of our news agencies or whatever kind of portray the Israeli position as good, they deserve it, isn't it somewhat wonderful-ish? And I've never got that impression from you. So just help us understand how you think we should think about the collateral loss of life that happens in Gaza and Palestine, and now might happen in southern Lebanon.
Yeah. So that word collateral damage, it's one of those whitewash words, right? There's like kind of a word that you can use in polite conversation, but hides behind it a horrible, horrible truth. Yeah. Those are people being killed, civilians, men, women, children, babies, and it's a terrible, terrible reality. That's how horrible wars are. Yeah. And I think that somewhere in the war-averse Western world, we have forgotten how horrible war can be. Most Israelis are very deeply concerned, first and foremost, about our casualties, our soldiers, the people who were killed in the war and continue to suffer, and then also concerned by the damage that is done to civilians in Gaza. But in that order, right? I think it's unfair to ask of people who have been hurt in a conflict, or actually anybody, but that matter. I mean, we feel terrible when we hear news about a tragedy befallen a child in Oklahoma City. You'll feel worse if it happened to a child in Stillwater. You'll feel even worse if it's somebody you know. And if it was your nephew or your family, you'll be devastated. If it was your child, you would be shattered. Right? And so there are degrees in the way humans exercise their emotions. And I think it's unfair and dishonest to demand Israelis to have the same level of compassion to the children of their enemy who are sworn to kill them as they do to their own children. Having said that, when we talk about the numbers, I think it is important to ask the question what the numbers are. I think it is. Because the numbers that are reported now on the news are, the number that is quoted often is 40,000. Like 40,000 Palestinians have been killed. That's an awfully high number. That's a terribly high number. That number comes from Hamas. Right? That's the number that is quoted from the health authorities in Gaza, which are Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist, lying organization. They don't have a problem raping, killing, burning, beheading, kidnapping, torturing, and executing civilians. They don't have a problem lying about numbers. And they do. We know they do. That's been proven. But I want to, for the sake of this discussion, go with that number, 40,000. I think the numbers are much lower. But let's go with 40,000. Israel, the Israeli army estimates that we have killed between 17 and 20,000 terrorists. All right? 17 to 20,000 terrorists that are part of this 40,000 number. Now, again, I don't know if that's exactly accurate. It's an estimate. But for the sake of argument, let's go with these numbers, which makes the ratio of combatant to non-combatant roughly 1 to 1 or 1 to 1.5, right, if you go further. And this is without considering the rockets that Hamas fire that fall in Gaza and kill Palestinians, and the people who die of natural causes, and the violence that Hamas also applies to its own population if they try to say something against Hamas, or when they try to get to aid that Hamas is trying to steal. So let's put all those numbers aside. Do you know what the average ratio of combatant to non-combatant casualties are in global conflicts? According to the UN, and you can look this up, it's 1 to 9. That's 1 combatant to 9 civilians. This is in the global average. The Americans and the British in Iraq and Afghanistan got to 1 to 5 in the American case, 1 to 4 in the British case. So when we talk about collateral damage, and again, 20,000 is a very awful high number. And we should, and you should, also pray for them. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. War is horrible. The accusation against Israel as though it's an indiscriminate doesn't carry water when you look at those comparisons. 1-to-1 or even 1-to-2 is far beyond any other a ratio of casualties in any other army, in any other conflict around the world. Not only is Israel not guilty of genocide or indiscriminate killing, Israel has set a new standard in urban warfare. And again, it's not me saying this, it's the data that's saying this, and urban warfare experts. So while Israelis are devastated and are horrified by the loss of life, they also understand it's the cost of war. And the final part of this answer, and this is what a lot of my Israeli friends are saying, I don't know why you spend so much time talking about this. They started a war. You don't get to start a war and then complain about losing it. It's a war we didn't want. It's a war we didn't start. And you know what? This war can be over tomorrow if the hostages are returned and Hamas lays down its weapons.
I appreciate that. So two final questions. One of these is one we've talked actually quite a bit. What do you want us to know? And not just about, you've done a great job in terms of the specifics, but what would you want us to know about how do we understand and look at just a lot of events that are happening in that area? Because we're even hearing a lot over here about Hezbollah and its ties to Iran, and then Hamas and its ties to Iran, and Iran with Israel, and Israel's problem with Iran and the Houthis. And so give us just an overall, 8-minute conversation in regards to how do you think we can be informed about that area in terms of what's happening, so that we can know, but more importantly, that we can pray and be informed as people who genuinely care for the world in which God has placed us in. So give us at least your perspective of what's going on. We call it, the Middle East region.
So one of the things that are very important for me on this trip to emphasize is to try to zoom out of the specific conflict in Gaza. The war that's happening now between Israel and Hamas, between Israel and the Palestinians, between the Arab-Israeli conflict, whatever, Israel and Lebanon, Israel's Hezbollah, that's not the real war. That's not the real war. That's what everybody's focusing on. They will have you believe that if you only solve this one little problem, everything else will be fine. But that's not the real war. The real war is a global chessboard. There's a global conflict going on. Regionally, Iran has spent the last 40 years building what they call the ring of fire around Israel. I have actually a slide. There we go. Iran has built, I actually used this slide also last time, but those of you who weren't here, you can see that Iran has created proxies. The Iranian MO, generally speaking, is to find countries that are already destabilized, we're coming to help, right? So insert their own militias into those countries to stabilize them. What they do actually further destabilize them. Create a militia that is stronger than the local military force, and now they're there to stay. They've done this in Lebanon, they've done this in Iraq, in Syria, they've done this in Yemen, and of course the Gaza Strip. And in all these cases, the militia, the terror group that is functioning, is stronger than the local military. And they placed that in order to circle Israel, to create deterrence, to prevent Israel from attacking Iran and its nuclear development, nuclear program, but B, when they choose to, when they pull the trigger, to enter the conflict with Israel in order to destroy it. This is what they say. It's not me saying what I think they say. This is what they actually say. Israel must be eliminated. There's a clock in Tehran counting down for the elimination of what they call the Zionist entity. Why they're doing this? They're doing this because Israel is a stumbling block, but also a springboard for their greater aspirations. We are the small devil. You are the big devil. Also, somebody quoted to me just the other day that that's what they say. First, they're going to come for the Saturday people, then they're going to come for the Sunday people. We can laugh about it, but this is actually what they mean. They're developing the means to do so. If they're able to take Israel out of the equation, they will galvanize the whole Muslim world behind them. Saudi Arabia will go radical again. The UAE and Bahrain will be eliminated. They will be able to take these forces within the Muslim and Arab world and use that as a force multiplier to go to Europe and then to America. This is their agenda. Now, they're not alone in this game. And what I want to impart upon you, and this is really the distillation, the emphasis I want to make on this trip that's different from last time that I was here. The flood is coming. The flood is coming. It's not just Iran. It's an axis of Iran and Russia and China and North Korea and Venezuela and Cuba and now Brazil and other countries that are in this group of countries that are challenging the West. And they're challenging the West militarily in Ukraine, in Israel, in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan. But they're also challenging the West economically and culturally. They're creating a alternative economic system, the BRICS countries, going off the dollar. They're going to try to create an inflation in America that will drive your economy into the pits. They're infiltrating pop culture, academia, media, politics. They're already here. Last time that I was here, I said this, and I said it's in your universities. And then the universities erupted with those demonstrations and the campgrounds, the pro-Palestinian, which, by the way, I reject the definition of pro-Palestinian. They're not pro-Palestinian. If they were really pro-Palestinian, they would be demonstrating against Hamas. As long as Hamas is in charge, Palestinians will not have a good life. You want the Palestinians to have a good life, get rid of Hamas. But they're chanting with Hamas. They're calling on Hamas to bomb Tel Aviv. They're wearing Hamas headbands. They are waving Hamas flags, and they're calling from the river to the sea, which is a call of extermination against Jews. Next time, it's not staying on campus. It will spill over into the streets. They call for, there's only one solution, intifada revolution. The intifada is the violent uprising. That's when, if you remember, those of you old enough to remember, in 2000 and 2005, the buses blowing up, the restaurants blowing up, suicide bombers, suicide vests. That's the gift to the world of Palestinian terrorism, and from there to the other terror groups. That's what they're talking about. And I'm worried that this spillover will start to affect you here. You have people from thousands of Hezbollah operatives who are infiltrating your borders to the south. Venezuela is receiving UAVs, those attack drones that are attacking Ukraine and Israel, are now parked in Venezuela on your southern border. It's already here. The flood is coming. My question to you is, are you prepared? Are you prepared for the flood? Spiritually, physically, politically, diplomatically. The war that is being fought now between Israel and Hamas is not the war between Israel and Hamas. It is the front line of a battle of civilizations. And the question is, what world do we want our children and grandchildren to grow up? Who's giving the tone? Who is giving the tone in the world of tomorrow? Is it the despots, the tyrants, the dictators, the people who subjugate women and religious minorities and throw people they don't agree with off the rooftops, that promote jihad and martyrdom, blood and dystopia and destruction wherever they go, because from their perspective, it's just a shell. Real life begins after death. In the Iranian case, In the Russian case, they want to get their pinnacle. They want to return to that place in the pyramid where they dominate Europe and rival the United States. The United States is in the way. The Chinese need to export their economy. They're facing a decline in population. The United States is in the way. Right? Venezuela, these cartels, these narco states that are trying to export their goods, the United States is in the way. For different reasons, they're all banding together in order to perpetuate this ongoing war. And it's already here. And so, again, the question is, what world are our children growing up? And I know the answer that you all want to give is the other one, where Western democracies, as flawed as they are giving the tone. The values of freedom, liberty, protection, equality, protection of minorities, the Judeo-Christian value system, the success of the West, its scientific progress, its prosperity, it all comes from there. All of it. And they're coming. So are you ready?
I've been talking to Uri about this, and I said to him, you sound like an alarmist, right? And he said, yeah, like I do. So I want to say this, and then we'll wrap up with some stuff about trying to go over and see this wonderful part of the world that you're talking about. And I mean that, actually. I would say this. I would say that one of the things that we cannot do then is I don't think it's smart. I'm enough of a student of history that it's probably ignorant to just dismiss all of the alarmists because they're an alarmist and nothing bad can happen. Fair? It just seems ridiculous. So we're not going to do that. One of the reasons why I even like you being here, to be honest with you, is to hear a part of the world. When I am in other parts of the world, when I'm in Poland, and you were probably in Ukraine, they just didn't tell you were in Ukraine, Alec, the first time we went, you really do realize, it's not Stillwater. It's not America. And so I think it's good to hear some of these alarmist type things, because it's not like it's just in one part of the world, and we have even seen it on American soil. We just remembered 9/11 just a few days ago again. So it's not like that can't happen here. So on the one hand, I really do appreciate, I'll think about this, I'll pray about this. But I do want to offer this as not a correction for what Uri says. We will see how the Lord works out his plan. I do believe that one of the things that we need to do as we listen to different voices from different parts of the world, and as we hear about perspectives, even shared perspectives, shared commitments, shared values, that we recognize what we can and cannot do. I think one of the most important things that a human needs to do is to realize and to not have an overinflated view of what we can accomplish. Because I promise you, what Uri is saying is not, hey, Iran's the bad guy, can one of you go out and fix him? And so that can lead us to one of two things, is to either just be overwhelmed and scared. No, we understand that God is the one who judges the world and gives kingdoms to whomever he chooses, right? So we don't panic, and we're not in that sense necessarily afraid. But we also don't put our heads in the sand and act like our part of the world is every part of the world. And that takes some real maturity to be honest about real problems and real difficulties that are really there, without hearing the alarm and panicking, but instead hearing the alarm and rightly responding, praying for, thinking through. I like how you said it, preparing spiritually, right? Physically, however you want to describe that. I think we learned that a lot even through COVID. To be aware of these things so that when you're watching the news or in the voting cycle, that you're aware that maybe international issues are a bigger deal than we think they are. It's good for us to hear that, don't you think? So what does that mean? And I think it's, in that sense, really good for us to hear a perspective that I don't know if we're able to hear. for a number of reasons. But I do believe that, particularly as followers of Jesus Christ, that the one thing we do not do when we even hear a serious alarm is we can either panic and act in a way that does not truly trust in God, or we can actually, in a very mature and proper way, pray for and then live out our faith, and to have the influence that we can have with the people that we can have, and make a difference with the people that we can have. I was speaking in Corvallis at a different OSU one time, and they showed to a bunch of high school students a video about sex trafficking in Asia. And then I got up on the stage afterwards and I asked these 14-year-old children how they were going to put an end to it. And I just wanted them to get a sense of just like, I mean, what do you expect them to do? Why'd you just show them a video about that? And a young man named Noah, speaking of floods, stood up in the middle of my sermon and went, well, I would do something if I thought it'd make a difference. And I literally don't have that happen often in sermons. And I just stopped and I realized he's making a good point. And so I said, well, Noah, the good news is you only need to do what you need to do. So may we have not the sense of, oh, that's probably not going to happen, and put our heads in the sand. May we not just run around in circles and just post 50 really rather ridiculous things on our social media feeds that really doesn't, you think you're changing the world. You're not. You're just annoying your friends. So that isn't the cure either. What can we do? And then the answer is maybe even have more conversations about what can we do and make small differences in the world like we've made as a church, right? In Ukraine, in Mexico, in Honduras, we're actually helping people from Venezuela. And we're going to always be talking about the very things that we can do. And thank you very much for helping us see the bigger issues that are at stake.
Yeah, I know that this is, well, using the word alarmist. I'm not coming to you as a Jeremiah holding up a sign, the end is nigh, you're all gonna die. No, that's not the alarm that I'm sounding.
Yep.
I'm going back to Deuteronomy, where God tells the people of Israel, today I give you a choice. There's life or death, there's good and evil. Choose life, choose good. And the way you do that is follow the path. You follow this path, you follow the laws. You stick to your faith. And you stick to your faith, you stick to your laws, you stick to your values, you get good, you get life. You go off the path, you leave your values, you leave your laws, you get death and bad. And we're on a path. The world is on a path. Our countries, our respective countries are on a path. Our leaders are taking us down a path. And we have choices to make. And there's not much. You guys, you have your missions, and I think that's an amazing way to present it. To go out and do good in those places, because those places are suffering. And you can impart your goodness upon them. I would ask you again also to, if you have Jewish friends, colleagues, business partners, acquaintances, friends from college, to give them a call. You probably called them in November. Call them again. Tell them I came by again and I told you to do it. Ask them how they are. They're hurting. They need to hear you. So all these things together, come visit Israel.
So yeah, we would love to come. So one of our goals is to try to figure out as soon as possible. If we were to go over, you would even say, yeah, I mean, it would be a trip that would be safe. That would be, I mean, so that's when it will happen, is when Israel would be as safe as Israel can be for our time there, correct?
Yeah, look, Israel is safe. I mean, I raised my children there. I don't consider myself to be an irresponsible parent, but I hope. But hi, Nave, Yael, Eden. Hi. I raised my children there. They live their lives there. People are coming. I mean, the flights are full. I tried to shorten my trip. I tried to get home 5 days earlier. There's not a seat on a flight for 5 days until my scheduled flight. Flights are full. People are coming. The country is safe. to the extent that it offers you a place where there's safety. And if there's a siren, you go to the safe room, right? And to my knowledge, no tourist has ever been hit by any of these rockets. You're more likely to get hurt by a traffic accident or some crazy Israeli driver, but not from terrorism. So the country is safe, and there are limitations. Like you said, we can't go north, we can't go south, but we can work that out. And now, for two reasons, well, for many, many reasons, but two main reasons, is actually a better time to come. Israel at a time of war is special. Israel's always special. At a time of war, it's even more special. I talked about the public discord. There is polarization within Israeli society. There's a lot of political angst. But there's also tremendous, tremendous resilience of a nation at war that knows its place in history, that knows its place in the grand scheme of things and is fighting for values, for its life, for its place on this earth, and you feel that it's palatable when you walk the streets in Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and elsewhere. And so being in Israel at this time is even more special than in normal times, whatever normal means. You can also volunteer, and you can also assist, and you can also do a lot of things for the effort, as you do in other places, to help those that are in need, those internally displaced refugees, etc. And the second reason is that as sooner or later, tourism will resume, right? It'll take 6 months, it'll take 8 months, it'll take a year. The war will be over. The result of the war will determine our future, your future, not just ours. Like if Israel is not allowed to win, then jihadism, radicalism, these axis of countries will expand elsewhere, to Europe, to South America, to Africa, to North America. But for a short while, the country will be back to business, and then everybody's going to want to come. And you won't be able to find a hotel room, or a guide, or a bus. So now's the time.
So what we will be doing is, we'd love to know for those of you that are interested and when you might be interested. Obviously, we're not doing anything in 2024, but in 2025. And then I know that there is one of our great sister churches here in town that is definitely praying and planning for 2026. But a lot of it would have to do with, I'd go tomorrow, and whenever I get kind of sad around the house, Andrea always responds with, do I need to send you to spend some time with Uri? Which is, part of it is spending time with him, and then the other part is being able to walk up the front steps of the temple area. Is one of my favorite places in the world. So I would just love to know, for those of you that may have an interest, if you could somehow, and you know how, let us know that, yeah, I have an interest, and we're looking at roughly this time period. Glad to answer any questions that you might have. And again, we hope the whole place is open, but for example, if Dan is closed and Caesarea Philippi is closed, we have pictures. There are other great places that none of us have actually seen that Uri believes that we can actually go and visit. And Jerusalem, if you think, we spend 5 days there every time, and if you think we saw it all, we did not. And so there's definitely other opportunities that we can take to go to some other places. So if you have an interest to return or to go for the first time, if you could let us know, that would be great. Also, this is a QR code that is available to show our appreciation for Uri, and to continue to help to care for him. As you know, his life has been completely disrupted by what has happened, and he has 3 beautiful children to take care of. And so we appreciate him taking the time. Do you not appreciate him sharing?